Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the accountant edition of the Global Wellness Headquarters podcast. In episode 2, I'm going to talk to you about finding podcast guests. Now, first, I want to give you context of why this is important. And I'll just share that I've worked with marketing, salespeople. I've trained both marketing and salespeople. And the number one challenge they have over and over again is how do we, first of all, have that first conversation so that they can get to know somebody and hopefully sell them something. The second biggest thing is how do we nurture that relationship and turn them from, um, an audience member to a paying customer. And one of the things I do, I use my podcast first and foremost, it's a networking tool. I truly care about my audience. I truly care about my guests. So I reach out to people, I invite them to be guests on the show. More importantly, my current guests invite others to be on my show. Literally 1 hour a day, 100% of my business development activities, all of the clients I need come through my podcast. Now, it's never direct. I have a podcast and that person becomes a client. It's almost always I interview somebody, I share their message on my podcast. They love the experience. They connect me with somebody else, that somebody else becomes a client. So I want to stress whether you're an accountant listening to this or you're another type of small business, all you need to know is who your audience is. If you are really clear on who you serve and what you do for them, a podcast can help you. I don't care if you sell products, I don't care if you sell services, I don't care if you sell air. Maybe you sell products and services. A podcast is a great way for your audience to get to know you and for them to become raving fans. Because no matter what the marketing gurus will tell you or the sales experts tell you, people buy from people before they buy products or services. So if you have a relationship with your audience, if you've built out that connection, they will find ways to help you. They'll find ways to serve you and to be served by you. So my number one objection I get from people is I don't know anybody or I don't know who to ask. I'm going to make your life really, really simple. First and foremost, think about your current 10 best clients, whoever they are, why ever they're your favorites. Just think about your 10 existing best clients. I'll have a strategy if you don't have 10, but really, truly think about your 10 best clients and ask yourself what problems have they solved or have you helped them solve that if you interviewed them and they shared that with your audience, everybody would benefit. Or you could interview them and talk about their business experience, their tips on success, things like that. Think about it as a way of adding value and offering advice to those perfect prospects who haven't picked up the phone yet to call you. So use the formula of how to plus problem solved. So how to solve X problem. And for example, this episode is how to find podcast guests. So record the videos, and I use Zoom. It's really easy to use. It's really low cost. It's highly effective. But basically, the idea is think about the audience you want to serve. Those are the people that would pay you to work with you. And then think about the strategic partners. Those are the other people in your space that you work with, that help serve your clients. That maybe you send referrals to them, maybe you make introductions, maybe they send people to you. I talked a little bit about that in the last episode. But basically, think about your strategic partners. These are people who already have an audience of clients, patients, customers. And if you add some value to them, they'll add some value to you and you'll meet people. So the first thing I do is if I'm launching a new podcast, which I do fairly regularly because I have different themes. When I launch a new podcast, I pick either my 10 best clients. And if I don't have 10 clients, I pick 10 experts that I'd like to know. And again, to be clear, those experts are in the space, they've got an audience, and they're serving the people you'd like to work with. And maybe you don't have a long list, but I'll reach out to a dozen at most. And I'll just say, hi, so and so. I read your profile on LinkedIn or I follow you on Instagram, however you know them. and just say, I love the message. I would love to have you on my podcast. Full disclosure, it's a brand new podcast. My goal is to build my audience, introduce this to my community, and connect my guests to one another as a networking opportunity. Um, would you be open to being a guest on my show? And I'll be really honest with you, some people will tell you exactly where to go and how to get there. That's like 1%. Some will say, tell me more. Others will say, I'm in. For your first few shows, focus on the people who say, I'm in. If somebody needs to be convinced, they're not your best first guest. Now, if you just really want to get practice, just invite people, maybe um, you really, really want to work with a certain realtor, reach out to that realtor and say, hey, would you be a guest on my show? I'd love to share your thoughts on the housing market with my community. But always reach out and just say, look, it's a brand new show. There's no statistics. My goal is to connect all of my guests with one another. I want to build a network that serves audience. And you want to be clear, my audience, for example, is entrepreneurs over 50 who are passionate about spending time with their kids. That's a very clear audience. So share your audience and say, would you be open to being a guest on my show? And I use LinkedIn exclusively. LinkedIn is my place. If you're not on LinkedIn, you and I are probably not going to bump into each other. And more importantly, if you're not on LinkedIn, I don't know how to share you with my community. So I have that one standard: you have to be on LinkedIn. And basically, what I do is I connect my guests with each other on LinkedIn. I have a little community on LinkedIn, and I make sure every single guest gets to know each other. Now, the magic of this, I am networking. I'm showing them how I network. I'm showing them that I network. So the next thing I do is I always introduce somebody, my new guest today, to one of my past guests or somebody else in my network. And basically, what that does is it reminds them Jeff is a networker. Jeff likes to connect people. I need to follow up with Jeff. And it's magical because reciprocity kicks in and they're going to want to send you future guests. So I believe my secret sauce is that I leverage my podcast to connect people. I tell my guests I don't care about the vanity numbers. What I care about is, did somebody connect with you through the show and did they ask to work with you? And more importantly, did it allow you to connect with somebody else who can help your business? So I literally genuinely use my podcast as a way of serving others. I meet somebody great, I happily introduce them to my community. Now, the other little secret ingredient that works amazingly well is when you're doing the podcast, never, ever, ever try to sell your business services or products to the guest. But at the end, when you're done with the show, so I always record my show in 45-minute slots. The first 5 minutes, it's just chit chat, getting to know each other, asking some questions. Then I do the podcast 20, 25 minutes. And then afterwards, I always ask them, do you know anybody else who would make a great guest on the show? And believe it or not, that's been the difference between begging people to be on my show and being flooded by guests. I literally, right now, I have to limit my calendar to one podcast episode a day. I get dozens and dozens of requests every day for people who want to be on my podcast. So it works really well. You just need to be clear on your parameters, who you want to serve, who you want on the show, and always ask. So that is my super secret. Ask my existing guests to be recommend the next guest. And just for anyone who's looking for numbers and want to know whether this works or not, one of my guests set a record. She introduced me within a week to 32 future guests. And all of those were perfect guests. They met the criteria. We had great conversations, and many of them became strategic partners and clients. So that's my little secret of how to find podcast guests. Again, if you're just starting out, reach out to the business advisors you trust, or ask your friends and family, who do they trust? And just ask if they'd be open to being on the show. Thank you.